Welcome, my friends. Welcome back to the Thought Room. I am so veritably excited to share this week's episode with you featuring my dear friend, Erick Godsey. Do you know when you meet people in life and you're meeting for the first time and you just look at each other and there's this little twinkle, there's this little recognition of like, hey, I know you from somewhere. Well, that is exactly what it was like when I first met Erick. He is an incredible human being and unquestionably has become one of my soul brothers and life allies. Erick is truly one of the most intelligent men I know, but beyond that, what makes him so cool is that he's not just book smart, he has an impeccably wise heart. He's honest and he shows up for his own growth head on like nothing I've ever seen. Erick has also extensively studied the work of Carl Jung, and he's really into the human psyche and dream symbolism and the ego, and he often jokes that he has a big ego, but in truth, this dude is one of the most humble dudes I've ever met. So I met Erick back in March in Austin, Texas, where I had the pleasure of being on one of the early episodes of Erick's podcast, The Myths That Make Us. If you go back to that episode and you listen to it, you might notice that I couldn't resist the temptation to break the format of Erick's podcast, and I actually start asking him a few questions. Off the air, he said to me, you should really start a podcast. And those words felt like a spell or a sacred commitment to the universe because here we are, and he definitely planted that seed for me. This week's episode was recorded at Soltara Healing Center in Costa Rica, where I was humbled to have the opportunity to be the first one to chat with Erick fresh out of his 4 ceremonies. And these were his first ever experiences with ayahuasca, so I felt honored that he trusted me to help him share his incredible story. To me, this episode is so special. I think that anyone who listens will be able to feel that within a matter of just a few minutes, we drop in and we go really deep. This feels rare, and Erick shares with extreme vulnerability. You can feel his alignment, his knowing, and his truth in the vibration of his words. They are just dripping with golden wisdom like honey. So I hope that you listen through to the end, and I highly recommend, if you aren't already, following Erick on Instagram at Erick Godsey. I'll put that in the show notes as well, and I recommend that you sign up for his newsletter. I also want to thank every single listener who has posted about the Thought Room on Instagram, in their feeds, in their stories, or who's shared with a friend. Anyone who sent me a personal video or a heartfelt DM about how things are resonating with you. I had the opportunity over Christmas and New Year's to really talk to some of you and read your feedback. And in moments, the things that you shared really brought me to tears. So thank you so much. If you're not already following the Thought Room podcast on Instagram, get on there. Come find me. It's at Thought Room Podcast, and it's the most active and up-to-date way to stay looped into new episodes and extra content, and just to drop in and say hello. On a final note, if you are feeling curious about learning more about ayahuasca retreats at Soltara Healing Center, I've put a link in the show notes where you can visit to find out more. They've also been so kind as to hook up Thought Room listeners with a $200 discount on any of their weekly retreats. You can get that by using the code ThoughtRoom and clicking the special link that is in the show notes. It is bit.ly/Soltara, so bit.ly/SOLTARA. Without further ado, join me now in the Thought Room for the sweetness and kingly presence that is the one and only Erick Godsey. Erick Godsey, welcome to the Thought Room. Thank you so much for being here. I have been so excited to have you on ever since, even before I conceptualized this podcast. Thank you so much. This is so exciting to have you here.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for sharing your story about ayahuasca, because it really inspired me to come here.
That's amazing. And when you say here, we're talking about Soltara Healing Center, which is where we are. We're in Costa Rica right now, and we're actually recording this live from there.
The day after I finished a week of 4 ayahuasca ceremonies.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. You've been here for a week.
Yeah.
And there was a 5-day stint, and in that 5 days, you had 4 ayahuasca ceremonies.
Yep.
And now you're here, sitting in front of me.
Yeah.
And what are you feeling right now in this moment?
A sense of having completed something that felt like my destiny, felt like the hardest spiritual thing I've ever done. That there is the potential to radically change my life if I'm willing to show up to the integration, and that I can feel the intensity of my spirit actively eating away parts of my ego. And I still have a fucking huge ego, but there are parts of it that I know don't serve me, that I can feel are like being digested, like actively, like in front of me. Like even after the experience is done, I can feel some stuff just starting to dissolve off of me.
I was watching a little bit of your process even before coming here. You were really active in sharing, with your followers and in your emails about what you were doing, how you were preparing. How were you feeling before you came here for this experience?
Really good. I knew that I showed up to the preparation, and the ceremonies, I think, reflected that. Tell
me more about your preparation, because there maybe are some people who are listening to this who, 1, maybe don't even know what ayahuasca is, and 2, certainly have no idea what the preparation for something like this is.
Yeah, so ayahuasca is a psychedelic, but the people who use it consider it a plant medicine, and that it's regarded as one of the master plants. And that's because they believe that there is a spirit inherent in it, that when you ingest it, there's something fundamentally different than like mushrooms or LSD. And I can attest to that. I've done most of the psychedelics, and this was like nothing I've ever done. Preparation-wise, they give you a diet to go on about 2 weeks before you come. But I work at an office with a lot of spiritual alpha males. And so they all told me their preparation, and that they did it like 4 weeks out. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do it 6 weeks out. And I'm joking that it came from a place of ego. It truly came from a place of fear and respect for the plant. And the feeling was like, I know I can do 6 weeks. And to know that I could and to not, there was a part of me that was afraid that like ayahuasca would be like, I know that you could have done 6 and you did 4 because you wanted to fucking, eat cake. But no pork, no sensual touch of yourself or other people. No caffeine. I cut out caffeine about 10 days before. No dairy. And I just did no gluten, no soy, all that stuff. I also intuitively chose, so I read like every day for like an hour to 2 hours. And it just felt like the right thing to do was for the 6 weeks, just stop reading as a way to like just let my mind start to sit. And I'm really glad that I did that, because in ayahuasca, if you try to think while it's happening, you get decimated. Or at least that's what I experience in my 4, is the part of your mind, the part of my mind that I use the most through daily life. That part, it's almost like ayahuasca was such a big force that if that part tried to move at all, it would just get torn asunder, you know? And so when ayahuasca was showing me what ayahuasca was showing me, it's like that part of me had to be super still and really quiet. And I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful for my Vipassana meditation practice, because doing that for the last couple of years was super beneficial to me in my experiences this past week.
Wow. Okay. So you get here.
Mm-hmm.
And you got here on Sunday, but then your first ceremony is going to be on Monday night.
Mm-hmm.
So take me in to the Maloka, which is where we drink the ayahuasca, and walk me through the setting, walk me through what you're seeing, you're smelling, you're feeling.
So the Maloka is this huge circular wooden structure that when you're underneath it, and people tend to lay down when they do ayahuasca because it's tough. And when you lay down and you see the roof, it looks like a mandala. And it's built in the Shipibo tradition, as I understand it. And I don't think it's an accident that it's a circle and that the roof looks like a mandala. The mandala is one of the universal symbols for like God or the self, or, you know, whatever word you want to use to describe the totality of the whole thing. So the Maloka has this awesome, like, jungle spaceship energy. And there's like 24 beds laying down with the head up against the wall in this circle. And then in the very middle of this huge wooden room, there's 4 beds. And 2 beds are for the male and female shaman, and the other 2 beds are for the male and female head facilitators. And I was positioned, so the facilitators will kind of feel the vibe of the group, and then they give you your arrangement numbers. And I was put right in the middle, across from the entrance. And so every night, the male shaman prepared his stuff right in front of me. And on that first night, I have this thing where most of my life has been experienced reading books. And so when I get to do an experience that I've read about, I'm like a fucking owl. Like I barely blink and I'm just looking at everything. And I just want to absorb everything. So I'm watching the shaman smoke like 5 mapachos before he does anything. And they believe that tobacco is a plant teacher, and that it's the plant teacher that best allows them to connect to the wisdom of all the other master plants. And the vibe in which he was smoking was like, I actually don't want to do this, but I have to do this. And like, it's like an ordeal to smoke that much tobacco. And also the way he moved when he was in that space was like, with the dexterity of a cat, but like the heaviness of like a fucking like rhino. And he, the shaman will sing into the bottle of ayahuasca to bless it. And then he brings it over to the female shaman along with the 2 facilitators. And by the way, the only light are these 4 awesome, ominous candles that are in like a diamond around the 4 beds in the middle of the Maloka. And once he puts down the ayahuasca, they start to call people up. And the hardest night, no, that's not true. I was about to say the hardest night was the first night because I had no idea what I was getting into. No, that's not true. Actually, no. I think on one level it was the hardest night because I had no idea what to expect. And there was so much fear because there's so much fear when it comes to psychedelics because like it could be anything. Like you're basically signing up for the potential worst experience of your fucking life or the best or somewhere in between. Yeah, so I had all these like pre-drinking rituals to kind of like get myself amped up, or no, truly to get myself calmed down. And so I meditated a bunch, I journaled a bunch, and then I wrote a letter to the person that was going to come out that night after having done it. And it was just like
the version of you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just like, thank you for showing up. You are the hero because you're doing something that you're terrified of. And whatever happens, like you fucking did it. And the first night was actually very chill. It was the chillest of the 4 nights because they give you like 1/3 or 1/2 of a cup. Yeah, so that was what that first night was kind of like in the setting. My emotion in there was actual excitement once I was in the space because this like feeling all the tradition and ritual wrapped around this thing, it really brings you a sense of calmness while you're sober. And then when ayahuasca comes in, it's a whole different story.
So that first night, you go up, they give you your cup, you drink it. You're walking back to your mat. You probably have insane feelings of butterflies. Like, well, it's done now, and all I can do is buckle up. And you go and you sit. And at what point do you sense something happening?
So the first night was very subtle, and I could feel my brain forcing, almost trying to like strain out a vision. But the truth was there were no visions the first night. Now that I have drank it 3 times after that, I could feel that like she was there, and it was very subtle, almost kind of like the stoned feeling you get from mushrooms, just kind of this like periphery, goofy, almost drunk feeling, but not quite drunk. I forget the word that they use for it, but there's this like oceanic sickness or oceanic dizziness that comes with ayahuasca sometimes. Yeah, and my first night was basically me waiting, and it didn't really like no insane experience actually came, but it was very sweet and gentle. And it's so funny. I heard so many people share their stories about like what happens if you don't get a strong dose and how that fucks with people so much. It did not fuck with me. I knew that it was coming the next night, but like probably like 8 people here, like, no, probably like 12 or 13, like had a really hard time. Like they were pissed. But
what was the sentiment? They were just like, oh, they wanted a bigger experience out of the gate.
Right. Because only like 3 people actually had like a full
strong experience.
Right.
So would it be fair to say there was some expectation on some people's part?
For sure. We all had expectations. Yeah. I know I did. Like I sensed myself trying to force visions. And what the next 3 nights show me is you don't have to do that at all. You don't have to do that even a little bit.
They will come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that first night was very peaceful.
And then what happened from there?
The second night has completely changed the way that I look at the world. I drank 2 cups and proceeded to, it truly, okay, so I'm trying to think of where to start the thread. So I did Vilca a year ago in Peru, and Vilca is 5-MeO DMT, regular quote unquote DMT, and a thing called bufotenine that basically allows the DMT experience to last like an hour. It's super powerful. It's overwhelming. And when I had that experience last year, it felt like it just knocked me the fuck out. Like I didn't bring back almost anything. It was just an hour of like confusion and terror. Night 2 of ayahuasca, it felt like I went back to that place, but I had extra resources with me, which I would probably credit as ayahuasca. And I was able to experience that state. Truly, from my perspective, it felt like I witnessed God. And what that felt like was, and it felt like infinity. It felt like everything was one thing, which terrifies my ego, fucking terrifies me. That it is always, has always been, will always be, that there's this non-concern for the human condition, not in an evil way, but just as in like, this whole thing is one thing, and you are not a special or different thing. It is all this thing. And I could feel that my ego, like, it's like the gravity of witnessing this experience, because this was a full-on vision. I was not in the room. Apparently a lot of really hectic stuff happened in the room that night, and I perceived none of it. But it felt like I was being like passed through the event horizon of a black hole, but the black hole was this God thing. And that if my ego had tried to resist at all, I would have just been vomiting and shitting everywhere. But I had read a book called Letting Go by David Hawkins before I came. And I heard it's like my inner monologue went from being a thing that thinks to this spell casting mantra repeating thing. And it was just saying love, love. And then sometimes it would say surrender, surrender. And it's like with that mantra, I was able to pass through the event horizon of this God experience. And then once I did, like once it felt like ayahuasca was like, he passed that test. Because that feeling of infinity has been the point in all of my psychedelic experiences that I've ever gone like all the way deep, where I get stuck and like I start to freak out. And this was the first time ever in my life where it felt like I passed through that terror. It's weird, but it's my deepest fear. This idea of infinity. It terrifies my ego, but like I passed through that. And then for the next like hour, I just had this experience of this like angelic light from above, like just almost like MDMA rain just fall on my body and just start healing my body. Just in a way that I have never, like there was like a loving, blossoming peace spreading throughout my body. And it truly felt like entities were just like if their hands instantly healed and they were just smoothing out my body. And it was probably the most blissful thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. And that felt like that lasted for like half an hour or something. And this state of peace that I was in was so profound that it felt like after that experience, I moved to this other experience where it felt like I was in some other dimension where I could feel the connections between me and every major energetic entity, human, I've ever experienced in my life. Almost like it was like a neuronal tree. And I said everyone's name, like this was like 50 people. And I said each of their names one by one. And the mantra thing was like, we can heal. And then the energetic thing was like, I was trying to give them that light. And in hindsight, it felt like what I was doing there, and this might just be all in my head, but it felt like I was sending them that type of love that would manifest in their life as a synchronicity, as that would serve as a call to adventure for them to eventually, it doesn't have to be ayahuasca, but for them to get to their healing. And it was like, I did that for like 2 hours. Like I said my mom's name, I said my dad's name, my brother, my sister, every friend that I have in my life, every ex-lover I've had in my life. And what was interesting is there were a couple, like I tried to send love to an ex-lover's ex that I know is in a lot of pain. And I felt his energy in that space say no. Like he wasn't accepting it. And then I had an ex that I tried to send that energy to, and it felt like she was enclosed in like an oyster shell. Like she was just this walled off thing. Like she didn't want it either. And while I was in that space, they closed the ceremony, and I was still super in the medicine space. Apparently it took me like an hour to get out of the maloka, and I tried. Like the moment it ended, I was like just trying. It was almost like I had sleep paralysis, and I was trying to like force my body to like move. But once I got out of the maloka and I hung out with everybody on the star deck, which is this part of Soltara that like oversees the ocean, you can see the stars.
Oh, those are the
Howler
monkeys
monkey, yeah.
in the background.
It felt like I had superpowers. It felt like I could see. It's hard to explain. It felt like I could almost see with my eyes what my intuition feels. And like, I've gotten to this state before on weed. It didn't feel this good, but it created the same response where it feels like I totally see the person's ego. I totally see the trauma. I totally see why they said that. I totally get the human experience for that moment. And I know how to respond in love in those moments. Like there's no guessing about, should I do this to get this person to like me, or should I not do this to not offend? Like it's just this knowing. And the really cool thing is like it felt like I could see my intuition, which is it's a hard thing to articulate, but it felt like I've lived most of my life interacting on the 3-dimensional world, which is, like you see the bed, you see the person. But it felt like this night there was an overlaid layer, and it was like the energy realm. And like there's a part of me that died this week that would have rolled his motherfucking eyes if he heard me talking about the energetic dimension. Like, bro. But I have a knowing now. It's not theoretical. It's not from a book. It's a knowing. And let the skeptics roll their eyes. That's cool. I'm going to go help people, And it lasted until like 5:30 a.m. and I had to make myself go to bed. And that was night 2.
Yeah. I remember seeing you after night 2 at breakfast and just looking in your eyes, and we kind of just nodded at each other, and you were like, yep. And I was like,
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. What you were saying about reaching that kind of ceiling of the resistance that you meet before you opened up into that
Right.
other space. It reminds me of like a rocket ship that is trying to get out of the atmosphere. And it's like super turbulent and everything's working against it. And then it like busts out into space. And then it's like, oh, everything's just weightless. And here it is. But there is really this point where the parts are all falling off and the screws are coming rattled. And you're like, I'm not going to make it.
Yep.
We're really not going to make it.
And what's interesting is that the felt experience of ayahuasca visions, it feels like I am melting into them. It felt like the God thing was this, if I had to give it a shape, it's like this some dimensional, beyond three-dimensional orb-like thing that's constantly like re-entering itself in this self-looping way, and it feels like infinity. And it feels like that's the core of whatever this thing is. And that the physical dimension that we're talking in right now is the furthest, most superficial part of this orb. Like it's the furthest from the source. And it feels like the energetic layer is one layer closer to whatever that thing is. And it felt like I fell into the middle. And then because I was able to not try to think about the experience at all, I didn't resist it. I wasn't screaming like a part. Like if this experience had happened to me before doing Vilka, I think I would have like screamed in the Maloka. Like I think I would have screamed. I would have been vomiting. I would have been so unable to face what this immense thing felt like. Because like, again, my identity in the face of that thing is a complete illusion. My identity in the face of that thing means nothing. But it's not mean. It's just, it's so fucking more than what I can possibly comprehend. And, you know, the ego for 28 years was like, when I was 7, my nightmare was, I was told what heaven was. I was told that heaven is a place that you go to forever. That was the only thing that like stayed with me. And I would cry at night thinking about, damn, if I do everything right, I'm going to have to go somewhere forever. And I would cry. And then I would pray to God to have him, that's how I saw it back then as a 7-year-old, to help me stop thinking about this. And when I did Vilka, it's like, it just fucking forced me to look at that thing for an hour. But I couldn't really integrate it. And then it felt like last night, or not last night, but on night 2, I was able to, it felt like I passed through my deepest, most existential fear. And I can feel my ego like, that was just an ayahuasca trip. But my spirit knows that that's the truth.
That's super powerful.
It terrifies the fuck out of me.
Yeah, I mean, of course, this was part of what they talked about too, is the ego. And the goal is actually not to obliterate the ego.
Right.
Contrary to popular belief. You know, the ego serves a function, and we are here bundled into these human bodies for a purpose, and the ego gets a lot of things done. It helps us be industrious and have podcast interviews and get on airplanes and go do these things. It builds cities, you know, it also destroys them, but it does a lot of things. Without it, we'd just be these ethereal, like light bodies. And so there would be no experience here for us.
Amen. A woman.
A woman. So then, you know, you come away from an experience with like this, and you have to ask, okay, well, I've experienced life as a human unconsciously when I was asleep, and I was just blissfully going about hitting the milestones of what a human life looks like. And now I'm here. I'm a different Erick. And I've seen something I cannot put into words. I'm not even going to try.
I'm going to try, but I know I can't.
Because it doesn't make sense. Like you were saying, you know, even in passing in one of our conversations, you're like, yeah, I saw like 9 dimensions. And I nodded. I actually knew what you meant, because it is just like, what does that mean to a person who hasn't seen that? Nothing. But there's people who have had an ayahuasca experience listening to this podcast who are nodding like, oh yeah, I know what they mean. So having had that, now you're at the return. You know, we're talking about the hero's journey here, and it's the return. And you're going to go back to your little hub in Austin, Texas, and you're going to bring your peace. What are you feeling about that? And how are you boiling this down to make any palatable sense to yourself with how you conduct yourself moving forward?
I know what my next couple of steps are. And so it's a matter of how I do it. And the downloads, like kind of the big overarching themes, are remember that you are a servant to God, this thing. You can finally put down your guilt at pretending that you're not as big as you are. And then the third one is there's a motherfucking warrior inside of you that you're going to need to use. Good luck.
Mic drop. I think that is thematic for a lot of people who have these ayahuasca experiences. It's like, stop playing small.
Yep.
It's like we have this programming where we want to be polite about it.
Yep.
You know, or if you're at a certain point on your spiritual journey, maybe you've read a little bit of Zen, Buddhism, and some of the, you know, Indian philosophy, and you've got this idea too of equanimity. Like we're all equal, we're all balanced, we're all,
Yep.
you know, we're all part of that one, which I, as Hallie, the ego, the mind, can conceptualize. Oh yeah, okay. So then I go about my day trying to act like, you know, we're all equal because I believe that, and that's a way to be a good human. But I think that can also be a crutch, and it gets us into a dangerous space. At least for myself, when I was called to step up, I would be like, well, I'm not better than anyone else. Why should I start a podcast?
Yeah.
Who's going to listen to me? I mean, anyone could do this, and it was something to hide behind.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. The big lesson of my last night, and I didn't share my experience in the share circle because what I experienced on the 4th night, if I were to tell most people, it sounds like the most egotistical thing I could fucking make up. And I still need to process what happened, because my truth is that I know it was the medicine and not my ego. But now that I'm sober, it's like that had to have been my ego. Like the downloads that I got the download in the ceremony. Don't speak this. Do it. Because it's the type of thing that if I were to tell people, like, it would just not go well. But the thing that came up, to your point, is that there are so many spiritual people who have done significant work who cut their fucking legs off because of their story about what the ego is. And they're not helping the world as much as they could. And there's this idea that is going to be one of my guiding principles. But in Mesopotamia, one of the rituals that they had for the king is every year on New Year's, the king had to take off his crown, take off all his regalia, and he was marched in front of the people, and he would have to get on his knees in front of the common people and confess all the ways that he wasn't a king that year. Because the idea is that the king is a bridge between the kingdom and God. And your role is to serve your kingdom as a bridge, like to let God come through you and to fucking share and protect. And so I feel that the call, especially from the last night, is we gave you this power. You have to come back and check in, and we'll let you know. And I'm fucking terrified. But
so you have to at some point
come back
and drink again.
Yeah, like maybe yearly until I get a different message. But I have without getting into the details, because I really feel like I have to keep them to myself, but it felt like this week I have now actually stepped into my name. I saw God. And Erick means like the king in the center. I was like, okay.
The king in the center, Godsey.
Right.
Such a casual name
right?
that you were.
Mom crushed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's a lot. I remember, I think it was maybe my second and third ceremonies. I'm not entirely sure now, but this theme came up for me, the playing small. And for me, there was this holding on to my suffering that was super intense. And I didn't purge the first and the second night, but the third night I had a really rough time. And I felt like my suffering was this bowling ball that was just the heaviest thing you could imagine in my gut. And I'd been having a lot of stomach issues too for months. Like I was constipated and it was horrible. And I remember basically like dry heaving, but I was stopping myself too because my ego didn't want to be the first one to throw up that night. They'd changed up the order and I was maybe like the fourth to drink out of 20 people. And I was like, no, I don't want to, because like I hadn't yet all week. And most people had just gotten it out of the way the first night or so. And I was checking in with this bowling ball of suffering in my stomach, and I was like, hey, what's going on here? Like, let's throw up. It's okay. And it was like, no. I was like, no, you can let this go. And I was like, no. And while this inner dialogue is happening, I'm dry heaving. It's painful. It's super painful. I can't throw up. And then what I realized was I didn't want to throw up my suffering. I wanted to hold on to my suffering because there was a belief in me that my suffering was the most important thing about me. And that I was someone special. That's what made me special over other people, is because I had been shit-kicked by life in so many ways.
Yeah.
Between, losing a sibling and between just the moves that I had, this relationship exploding in my face that felt like a divorce, and my parents' messy divorce, and being diagnosed with Lyme's disease, just all of these things that had been in my tornado of a life up until that point. I was like, I don't want to let this go, because if I do, I'm just nobody. And then it was like, yeah, you're nobody. And then it was like, it just all came out. But during those two particular ceremonies, I had this thought looping, because you know how that happens. You were talking about the mantra voice, and it's like your thoughts sort of stop, and then there's this different voice that just is like, it just knows, and it says only like one thing. Yeah. And my voice was saying podcast. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I was like, I did not come all the way here, drink this stuff and have the word podcast looping. Like, this is my ego. this is my ego just wanting me to be special.
Yeah, it's so, and I'll tell you off air what I said because I don't feel comfortable sharing it because it's fucking ridiculous. But my truth is that I know that it's my ego now saying that was your ego. That's not true. Like, it's like the ego is like, no, like, you're not allowed to be that. And I just know it's not true.
Ego inception.
Yeah.
Totally. It's a tricky dance. And this is part of the reason I want to do this, is because the mind is such a delicate instrument. It is the most powerful tool and the most destructive tool, both to others and ourselves, that there is.
Yeah.
And I believe it doesn't matter how you seek it out, but everybody in their life needs to seek out healing. Because, you know, some people are like, I'm fine, I don't have anything to heal. It's covered.
Yeah, you have no idea.
It's covered. And so whether you exercise or whether you have a spiritual practice or whether you're into psychedelics, whether you think psychedelics are the worst, it doesn't matter. Just find a way to really get in touch with yourself and take the first step in your healing journey.
Yeah. What you find when you're at these sharing circles and people share their experiences, every single one of us has trauma. If you're a 3-year-old and you have one night where you shit yourself and your parents don't hear you for 4 hours, that could leave a mark in you so deep that you began telling yourself a story for 24 years after the fact that you're not worthy of love, because no entity should be treated like that if it was loved. Or like, you had a sleepover at a friend's house and your parents didn't come get you when they said they would because they got into a car accident or something. You might start telling yourself the story that you deserve to be abandoned. And then you go play that out with the people you date. Like, all of us, we're children in a world that is big and hard to understand. And the child is going to try to make sense of it by telling itself a story. And the story is almost always wrong because they're a child. And then that story just attracts scars and scars and scars. And, you know, there's 101 ways up the mountain, but if you're treating people with anything other than love and compassion, you've got work. We've all got work.
Yeah. That's really beautiful. That was pretty much my takeaway too. It was like, it sounds so cliche, but it all comes back to love. So,
Yeah.
Like Ram Dass always talks about his guru saying, love everyone, and just love everyone. And he would come with all these like nuanced questions, and his guru would just say, Ram Dass, love everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked about the second night. We talked a little bit about your last night. Did the week have like an arc to it?
100%. It felt like day one was, let me introduce myself. And that really was my question. I was, Ayahuasca, will you please introduce yourself to me and I'll introduce myself to you. And then on night 2, my question was, will you please teach me the nature of the psyche? Or will you please teach me the nature of the human psyche? So after I drank and I started to feel the medicine, I asked Ayahuasca, what is the nature of the human psyche? And Ayahuasca said, what makes you think it's human? And then I said, what did I say? Well, then what is the psyche? And she said, the totality of possible experience. And then I said, is the human psyche different than ayahuasca psyche? And she said, same in the totality, different in the particular. And then I said, could you teach me something about the psyche? I don't know. And she said, I can't tell you, but I can show you. And then that's when all the fucking crazy shit happened. Night 3 was, will you please teach me the most adaptive human story? Or will you please teach me the most healing story that I could share with Western culture. And I was like 10 minutes into the medicine space. And she was like, it's a hero's journey, next. I was like, fuck, I didn't bring more questions. But I asked her, is there anything about the hero's journey that I don't understand that I should understand to help people? And she said, yes. You don't fight the dragon. You surrender to the dragon. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I had more experiences of my body being worked on that night because it's like the question got answered. But then without me even asking, she basically, I believe that she set the seeds that's going to create the flower that's going to completely transform my guilt. So I have very old feelings of guilt because life has always felt easy to me compared to my family specifically. And I just realized it in the sharing circle today and I started bawling, but I could feel that my siblings hated me when I was younger. And I took on this feeling of guilt, like my life is easy, luck comes to me. I kind of have an intuitive understanding of how to deal with situations. I'm guilty. And I was experiencing it in the medicine space because I got this direct download on night 2. And it's like, you can completely absorb the feeling of having to purge by being in alignment with what's happening through your breath. And there was this feeling of like, whenever I felt like fear or anger or resistance starting to come up, I could feel my intestines start to like produce the feeling of wanting to purge. And then I'd be like, oh, just come back to your breath. Mm-hmm. And it would fucking
dissipate.
It would just, and I was like, oh shit. Oh shit. And so then on night 3, I found that space again. And it's like, I was breathing like right in this like small line in the middle of my being where if I tried to force something, I would vomit. And if I tried to resist something, I would vomit. I just had to be. And everyone's fucking just going inside out. And I had this feeling of like guilt. And then I heard ayahuasca say, it's okay that you just get it. It's okay that you just get it. And then like it got smaller and it's like, you just get it. And then it got smaller and it said, you get it. You don't have to feel guilt. You get it. And I was like, whoa. And I can feel that truth is going to take some time to really eat up the fucking 20 some years of guilt. And then at the end of that night, somebody came up to me and he was like, dude, I'm so fucking proud of you. It's a guy I don't know. And I was like, what? He's like, you came in my vision and ayahuasca told me to tell you that she's proud of the work that you've done for the last 10 years to prepare. And so that made me cry. So on night 4, my question was, will you please help me bring forward my power for my greatest good and for the greatest good of all my brothers and sisters? And the beginning of that experience felt like I was in hell. It felt like I was in this infinite sea of despair, confusion, fear, and paranoia. And the way the ceremony unfolds is everyone drinks and then it's quiet for like half an hour. And then the 2 shamans slowly start to sing and it's the most fucking magical thing. And just, you feel the whole energy of the room start to like shift.
Like skeletons rising from the dead. It's like, woo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they'll sing to the whole group for a little bit. And then they each go at opposite ends of the maloka and start to sing to people one by one. And I was the first one sung to by the male shaman each night. And so I'm in this hell experience, and I feel one of the facilitators touch my back, and he says, "Erick, the shaman's here. Please sit up." And I don't know how, but I somehow sit up, and I instantly got the download. You are to sit at the edge of your mat and look at the point in the middle of his head the entire night. If you want to see what you're made of, that's the task. And he started singing, and he felt like he was a dragon. And his Icaros was fire. And the night before, I was told, you don't fight a dragon, you surrender to a dragon. And it was the weirdest sensation, but it was like my spirit body was looking directly into his, like in the middle of his face, that felt like an endless tunnel of just wall, wall, wall. That's the best I can do. But his Icaros, it felt like it was burning some part of me. And it was one of the most exhilarating feelings because I felt the unmovable power of my spirit. But I could feel like this part of me fucking dying. And there was no fear. There was no flinching. That there was a power in me that I have not tapped into that just was unmovable. And I don't like to sit up because it hurts my back. And I sat up for like 4 hours. And I looked at that point in the room the entire fucking night. And the ayahuasca visions were always trying to pull me away from that point. And like so much stuff was brought up to try to pull me away from that point. And I was just like, this has already been done. Like I had this feeling, I had this knowing that this task had already been completed. I just had to sit through it. But like it was my destiny for it to be done. And it felt like the Maloka was the axis mundi of the world, which means like the central point of everything. It felt like I was simultaneously in the room and that there were like other dimensions like phasing in and out of like that room. And it truly felt like this new Erick was being born by the fact that I was doing this initiation ritual. Like it felt so exciting on one level. It felt like this is the most difficult experience I have ever gone through, but I felt completely up to the challenge. And it's weird. I can taste the ayahuasca right now. And I can smell the smells in the room. And so while I'm holding this gaze and I'm sitting straight up, I'm continuing to do the thing with my breath that I learned from the other 2 nights, where I'm constantly like breathing into anytime. It's so weird, but like the room is so connected when you're on ayahuasca. And whenever anyone was having like a flare up of energy, it's almost like I could feel it coming into that part of my like psyche, and I had to just breathe and like absorb it. So it's like it felt like I was absorbing the energy of the room while I'm staring at this thing. And there was a moment of like, my truth is I know my ego wasn't in there, but there was a moment where it's almost like I had to operate my ego to tell myself there's no way this is real. There's no way, because I was starting to feel some pretty profound realizations, and that mantra voice was saying some stuff that was like, I could never repeat this. I mean, I could, but if I did, people would probably just roll their eyes, and like I would roll my eyes if I heard somebody repeat this stuff. But I had this moment where it felt like Don Howard, which was the shaman that I saw last year who passed recently, came down out of the like moonlight and stepped into one of the facilitators that kind of has his same type of body, Todd. And it felt like both of their energies told me, like, what you're experiencing is special, but everyone can experience it, but most people in this lifetime won't. So check yourself. You will be tasked you will be brought to task for the responsibility of this power. And there was like a playful like smirk, like, this is what you asked for, man. It felt like it was the experience that I needed to have to really step out of my boy energy and to start to step into my man energy. But the boy still has a safe place, but to operate from it, to not operate from it in fear or guilt or shame, but still have his curiosity and stuff. So yeah, it felt like the first 3 nights were basically preparing me for the ordeal, and the ordeal was the last night.
What you're describing about the energy in the Maloka, and when you can feel someone's energy rising and it gets flung like gack or slime just everywhere. And there's a part of you that wants to, it actually starts to contract, because that's a natural thing to do, to go like, oh, I don't want that to be me, or like, I don't. And then you have to like you said, like melt into it, soften to it and go, yep, I'm uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable hearing this. But they're uncomfortable too. And you have to like splay yourself, and then it like totally melts away. So that was a really apt description of what I've found to be true in that space as well.
And what's odd is a part of me is like, wow, ayahuasca was so nice to me, but I know I have to come back. Like I can feel that there's still such a tremendous amount of things to be worked on, but
how's that feel when you know something like that after just having finished what you're describing as the most difficult experience of your life?
Excited, because I know that the tools that I've got will unfold in the next year that's going to bring me to a level that I can't even imagine right now, that then will be the one that shows up to the next dance, you know?
Yep. Well, one of your intentions, asking about, how you can serve the greater good, that was actually one of my intentions when I first came to drink. And that was my big evening. I was basically shown, the phrase that was looping was big work. And I was like, no, like, again, I really struggle with the ego stuff. I never want to be one of those people who is calling themselves a great healer or a great leader. It's because, I contract at people like that.
Same.
And so, but I think I've taken it to the extreme as not wanting myself to be somebody to look at. So there was this big work looping. And I was like, okay, what do I have to do to take the next step in understanding the big work? More medicine, big work, more medicine, big work, more medicine. And that thought looped for me for probably 45 minutes. Just big work, more medicine. And don't forget, big work, more medicine. And I was like, I'm not going to forget. Okay, can we move on now? And it wouldn't, it just was there. And so the next night is actually when I asked, I was like, okay, show me more about the big work, or what do I have to, I think I said, what do I have to let go of in order to be able to do the big work? And that was the painful night where I was holding on to my suffering. And in fact, I never did burst through the atmosphere like we're talking about. My rocket ship didn't ever make it to that opened up space that evening. Because I was holding on. And so I basically had my work cut out for me. And I remember leaving here the first time going, oh, I'm glad I don't have to do that for a while. And that was in May. And now we're in November. So we're in the same year. And I'm back here again.
Yep.
So it's funny. I had no intentions of returning whatsoever. But this the synchronicities, man, and the listening and the surrendering. It's incredible.
Yeah, I feel like I'll be back at the end of next year. Yeah, I can feel myself making up the myth that that's my version of doing what the king of Mesopotamia did, is at the end of each year, I'm going to come, and ayahuasca can tell me whether or not I've used the power well.
Well, I am so humbled to have you here. I tell you this all the time. I love you so much. You have such a golden heart. I see the way that, the people who love you and follow you and get your newsletters, like how much they trust you and how much they love you. And that really speaks to your integrity. And I think that, the very first night we met, when you tried to mansplain to me what was it? Developmental psychology was. And I was like, yeah, I have a degree in that. Thanks. But I knew we were going to be, how have you described it? Like soul allies or life allies. So it has been my absolute honor to have you here today and to hear your story. And please let us know, how can people find you online?
First, thank you. And second, probably the best place would be Instagram. My name is ErickGodsey on there. And then you can get on my newsletter, going to erickgodsey.com, and I send out a weekly update of dope shit that I've been dancing with.
And will that be the place when your big work that you're brewing is revealed, that people will hear how to get into that?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.